Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me from my subterranean headquarters here in Beverly Hills, where I am going to be talking a little bit about the unfortunate circumstances that we find ourselves in this year. We're going to be talking about something which we've never previously discussed. You know, it comes before Pesach. We talk about how do I get rid of chometz? How do I clean this part of the kitchen? When we come before Rosh Hashana, we talk about Teshuvah, we talk Yom Kippur, we have questions about fasting. All of those questions we're very familiar with. We're not familiar with questions about Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur, which relate to not being able to go to shul. Because if there's one time every year when Jewish people attend shul, it is Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. We know that. So it's not a big secret. And it doesn't matter if you are Orthodox or if you are conservative or if you are Reform. It doesn't matter if you're a Chassid, if you're a Litvak. It doesn't matter if you're a Sephardi or an Ashkenazi. When it comes to Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur, we attend shul. That's the bottom line. But this year, there's two things which are happening which are very different. The first is that because of the virus, even those people who are attending shul are going to be attending truncated services. What does that mean? That means that even the services, the davening which you will attend, if you're going to shul, are going to be shortened quite dramatically from their normal length. For example, in our own case, our davening usually takes somewhere between 4.5 and 5 hours on Rosh Hashana, and Yom Kippur, obviously all day besides for a 2-hour break. This year, the davening is going to take 2 hours on Rosh Hashana, and we're going to have 2 hours first thing in the morning on Yom Kippur and 2 hours in the evening for Mincha and Ne'ilah, which means that most of the day is a break. So how are we going to manage that? So that's the first thing I'm going to be addressing today a little bit. And the second thing is that there are people who, despite all the precautions and mitigations, are frightened to go to shul. And I can't fault them for that. There's absolutely no reason to say, oh, you're wrong, you must go to shul, it's very important, it's imperative. No. If you feel that you're vulnerable to infection, and that if you are to catch the infection, it could have serious health repercussions for you, of course you shouldn't go to shul. But that means you're staying at home. Now, how many people on this Zoom, or who are listening to this, have ever been in a situation where they haven't gone to shul on Rosh Hashana? I don't need to take a head count. I can tell you that not one person who's on this Zoom has not been to shul on Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. Every single person has. So this is a completely new experience, not going to shul on Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. So we're going to talk about that as well. How does one address that situation? Before I do any of that, as any of you who know my Zooms over the past few weeks will be able to testify, is that I don't start any Zoom without first blowing shofar. So that's what I'm going to do now.
Uh-oh.
You ready for this? Good. So you know that every morning in Elul, we blow shofar, as in because it's the lead up to Rosh Hashana, to remind ourselves that we're heading towards the Yom Hadin, to the Yom Truah, the Yom Zichron Truah. This year, actually, the first year of Rosh Hashana, it's so unusual that even though it says in the Torah you have to blow shofar, because it's Shabbos, we don't blow shofar. Chazal say we don't want there to ever be an occasion where somebody might fix a shofar on Rosh Hashana, and therefore will have desecrated the laws of Shabbos. So we don't blow shofar on Shabbos. There's only one day of shofar blowing this year. It's on Sunday. And we're going to be talking about shofar blowing as well in a minute. So let's begin by getting our, as much as we can, our housekeeping in order. The first thing you need to know is that there is a machzor which was produced by Torah Stone. I think Carly has it. I'm going to send it to her again now so she can post it onto the chat. Hold on a second. There you go. So there was a machzor which was produced by Rabbi Riskin's Yeshiva of Torah Stone, which is an abridged machzor. And that machzor is really, it's a Rosh Hashana davening with all the bits taken out of it. So it's shortened to a level that if you're davening in shul, the davening is going to be short enough so that we're going to minimize people's exposure to each other and minimize the risk of infection. Let me just say this, that the halacha is very clear. Ushamartem ma'od es nafsheisecha. You must be exceedingly careful when it comes to protecting life, human life. Do you hear that? You've got to be extremely careful when protecting human life. You must guard your life, make sure that you are fully protected from any potential of fatal harm. And we know that particularly with this very infectious disease, that if people come in close proximity to each other for an extended period of time, the chances increase of infection. So if you're with somebody for half an hour, that's obviously better than if you're with somebody for an hour. If you're with somebody for an hour, it's better than if you're with them for 2 hours. If you're with somebody in the open air, it's better than if you're with them together indoors. If you're close to somebody, it's not as good as if you are far away from somebody. 6 foot seems to be the minimum measurement. If you could be 8 foot away from somebody, that's even better. So to the extent that it's possible to attend a minyan, our minyan will be very careful. We've got 2 minyanim. To attend a minyan where you can be in distance, socially distanced, wearing masks, and limiting any kind of exposure to the infection as much as possible, then you should daven at such a minyan. There are minyanim where they are not taking that level of precaution. That obviously increases the risk. There are minyanim where they're saying we don't want to miss out davening, because if we miss out davening this year, then people are going to come to shul next year and expect to be a much shorter davening. So we're going to daven the full davening. Well, fair enough, but then of course the people who attend that davening are going to be more exposed and the potential for their infection is greater. So our davening is going to be, as I said earlier, roughly 2 hours long. How are we going to achieve that? And let's discuss, to the extent that we can, what that means for people who are not coming to shul at all. Okay, so we're starting our davening in the minyanim that we're doing at Nishmat. So if you look at I don't know if it's been posted, it has, I can see in the chat. If you look at the machzor, which has been published by Torah Stone, or if you prefer, I've got here a copy of the Art Scroll machzor. You can look at that as well. I don't know if you have your own copy of the Art Scroll machzor. If you don't, I would suggest that you can obtain one between now and Rosh Hashana. On the other hand, you can print out this machzor of the Torah Stone. So if you look on, it begins on page, I must put my glasses on for this, on page 1, as it might. So you've got here all the things that you're meant to say, which are part of Psukei de Zimra. They've included this in the machzor, but we're not going to begin there. We're going to suggest that you do those things at home, and that what you do is you start at Nishmas, and the shul davening will start at Nishmas, which is on page 3. If you're davening at home on your own, of course you can do the full Psukei de Zimra. You don't have to do this shortened version in Torah Stone. You can do it as you would normally do on Shabbos. Do the full Psukei de Zimra. The only difference that's going to be in the davening of Rosh Hashana is that after Yishtabach, we don't expect you to be a chazan, but after Yishtabach, ordinarily we just would go straight to Baruch Hu. But we don't go straight to Baruch Hu. We actually say Shir HaMalos. Funnily enough, I don't see it here in the Torah Stone one for some reason, but we have it in all the machzorim. We would have it. If you see on page 264 in your Art Scroll machzor, you've got Shir HaMalos V'Mamakim Krosicha Hashem. So you say that before Baruch Hu. Now, on the first day of Rosh Hashana, It's Shabbos, so you just do the normal Shabbos davening. There's no extras. You don't add anything extra in. You just do the normal Rosh Hashana davening. And again, in some shuls, although in ours we don't, in some shuls they add yotzros in this particular part of the davening. We don't do that. You sing Keil Odoin, etc., etc., and you go all the way through until Shema, and you say the Shema, and then you go through until Shmona Esrei. Now, Shmona Esrei, which you can find in the Torah Stone one, which if you have it in front of you, that's on page 8. You can see the Amidah for Shachris is not going to change because this year we're trying to shorten the davening. The actual Amidah stays the same. You have to say the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei that you would normally say. We don't leave any pieces out. And if you look at it, you'll see that the davening for the Amidah goes through all the way through until the bottom of page 10. So that's, if you're davening at home, that's the way you would daven. Now, the question is, what do you add in, or what should you be saying, or try to be saying, if you're at home and you're not davening in shul? So we'll begin with that. So I do want to tell you that there are various pieces in the Shemona Esrei that we always add in, and which we'll of course add in because even if we're davening at home, makes no difference. We still have to add them in, and they are extra lines that we include in the Shemona Esrei as part of the Aseres Yemei Teshuvah. Zochreinu l'chaim melechofetz b'chaim v'chosfeinu b'sefer ha'chaim lemancha elokim chaim. What does that mean? So that's at the beginning of the Shemona Esrei. We say, remember us for life, O King, who desires life. Inscribe us in the book of life for your sake, living God. Okay, and then a little bit later on, we say, Micha Moicha Abarachmim, Zoicher Yitzurab L'chaim Barachmim. Again, we add that line in. It's only added in on Rosh Hashana, Aseres Yemei Teshuvah, and Yom Kippur. Micha Moicha Abarachmim, Zoicher Yitzurab L'chaim Barachmim. Who is like you, merciful Father, who recalls his creatures mercifully for life. And then towards the end of Shemona Esrei, we also add in a couple of lines. I'm not going to go through them now, but they are there in the Machzah for you to see. Actually in the Art Scroll Machzah, they're bolded. In this Torah Stone Machzah, they're not bolded, but they are in there. Unfortunately, the Torah Stone Machzah does not have translations. If you struggle with Hebrew, I really would suggest that you go online and order a copy of the Art Scroll Machzah if you don't already have one, so that if you are davening at home, or even if you're going to shul and don't want to touch a machzah that belongs to the shul, which is fair enough, that you at least have a machzah that you can use, which is your own, which has translation in it, and you'll be able to use something which will be not just useful for you this year, but will be useful for you in years to come. Now, if you're at home, there's very few things that you can say which are part of the extra sections of Shemona Esrei, which are in the repetition. This year, in fact, for Shachris, we are barely adding in anything. So, although usually we have quite a few pieces that we add in the repetition of the Amidah for Shachris, this year we're adding in one very small thing before Kedusha, and that is it. That's the whole thing. And then we just say the extra pieces that one normally says in Shemona Esrei. This is in the repetition. And we finish the repetition as if we were saying the repetition for Mincha, not the repetition for Shachris of Rosh Hashana. It's going to be a very abridged version this year, not relevant to the people who are at home. This is only relevant to the people who are in shul. And that's because we want to fit into this 2-hour schedule. If we start adding in pieces to the repetition of the Amidah, it won't be possible for us to finish the davening in 2 hours. And then, obviously we'll have lost any benefit for having people come to shul, because we'll have them longer and therefore expose them more to the potential for infection. Now, there is something called Avinu Malkeinu. If you look at your Torah Stone Machzah on page 14, you have Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu is something that we do not say on Shabbos. We only say it on a weekday. So for the first day of Rosh Hashana, you don't say Avinu Malkeinu. So if you're davening in the in the shul minyan, you'll see that we'll go straight after the repetition, straight to Kaddish, and then we'll begin laning. On the second day, we'll say Avinu Malkeinu. Similarly, at home, you will not say Avinu Malkeinu on Shabbos, but you will say, even though you're on your own, you don't need a minyan to say Avinu Malkeinu. You'll say Avinu Malkeinu at home on your own on Sunday after you finished the quiet Amidah of Shachris. So it's on page 384 in your Art Scroll Machzor, and it's on page 14 in your Or Torah Stone Machzor, and then we go to laning. I see that he's put here that there's, you say the Shir Shel Yom, which is what we would normally do as well in the shul. You say Hayom Yom Shabbos Kodesh. On Sunday, you say Hayom Yom Rishon B'Shabbos. We would normally do at that stage as well Anim Zemirot, which we're not going to do this year. We're trying to keep the service short. And then we do L'Dovid Hashem Oyer V'Yishi, which is the psalm that we do throughout Elul, throughout Aseret Yemei Tshuva, and all the way through until Shmini Atzeres. We say L'Dovid Hashem Oyer V'Yishi, an extra psalm as an acknowledgement of our of knowing the fact that we are in Yemei Hadin, that we are in the time when God is judging us for the upcoming year. As far as the Torah reading is concerned, so if you're in shul, the Torah reading is going to be read by the Baal Korah, and whoever's called up to the Torah will be called up to the Torah from their seat. They'll say the Aliyah in their seat, and the Torah reading will be done that way. If you're at home, then you don't have to obviously do laning from a Torah, and you can't do it from a Torah. However, it is advisable to look through the parsha that one would normally say, the Torah reading that one would normally say for the first day of Rosh Hashana and the second day of Rosh Hashana. Now, the first day of Rosh Hashana, the piece that we read is the piece which talks about that Hashem gave Sarah Imenu, Sarah, our matriarch, gave her a child called Yitzchak. That's the very first piece that we read on Rosh Hashana. Hashem Pokad es Sarah Kasher Amar. It's in Bereshis 21, and you should read that. And if you want to, I think you should find it inside the Chumash, and you should read it and you should look through it, because it's a very important parsha in the Torah in relation to Rosh Hashana. You can find it in the Art Scroll Machzor. It's on page 402. On the second day of Rosh Hashana, you also read the Torah from a similar section of the Torah. It's the next section. It's chapter 22 in Bereshis, and it's of course the story of the Akedah, when Avraham Avinu took Isaac and was about to sacrifice him on the altar, and God stopped him by an angel, and instead he slaughtered a ram. And of course, the horn of the ram is an indicator of the shofar that we blow on Rosh Hashanah. And the story of the Akedah is one which vexes us, which talks about our fragility, the fragility of life, our faith in God. And that's something, again, that you don't have to be in shul to read through and get inspiration or get faith lessons. You can do that very much at home, and I would recommend that you do that. If you want to, you can find it on page 402 in your Machzor, or you can just look at an Art Scroll Stone Chumash. I don't have the page number in front of me. It's chapter 22 in Bereshis. So now we come to, well, of course, the Maftir. You can read the Maftir the first day and the second day. You can find those on page 21 and 22 in your Or Torah Scroll Stone Machzor. The Art Scroll Machzor, you can find that on page 416. But we're going to talk now about shofar, because shofar is something which a lot of people have asked me about. What is it that we're going to do this year with regard to shofar? And it is a complicated question, because this year we're going to be either in shul in a truncated, abridged, summarized davening, or we're going to be at home, and it's not going to be quite the same as being in shul. So I want to say this, that me'ikar hadin, that means, strictly speaking, according to the halakha, we have to hear 30 kolot, 30 sounds of the shofar. What does that mean? Because the shofar is made up of different noises. That means we blow the shofar. I just blew shofar before. We have something called tekiah, which is a long, straight sound. We have something called shavarim, which is a sound broken into 3 sections. And then we have something called teruah, which is sounds which are broken into many sections. So at least 9, but it can be 20 as well. The way that we blow shofar is we want to be able to have heard the shofar in all its many variations, at least 3 times. So the way that works is that you blow the shofar to tekiah, shavarim, teruah, tekiah. That's one. That's one set. You do that 3 times. Okay. Then you do tekiah, shavarim, tekiah. That you do again 3 times. And then you do tekiah, teruah, tekiah. And you do that 3 times. So now you've done it 30 times. And that in and of itself, that unit is sufficient for what your needs are in terms of hearing shofar Rosh Hashana. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that you buy yourself a shofar and that you blow shofar on your own, because if you're not somebody who's had a bit of training in how to blow shofar, it's going to be hard to do that by yourself. Obviously, if you're going to come to shul, we're going to be blowing the shofar at least 30 times. And depending on the time, we may blow it a few more times so that you can get a few more, because usually we have 100 blasts of the shofar in the various formats, 100 blasts of the shofar. But this year, because we're trying to keep things short, it may be 30, it may be 60, it may be 70, we'll have to see how many we can get into the davening so that we can keep the davening at the length that we want to keep it. However, if you've heard at least 30, you have discharged your duty in terms of shofar blowing. Now, on Shabbat, you didn't have to hear the shofar, so that's not a problem. What are you going to do on Sunday if you're at home? So we are part of, I think, at least 2, if not 3 separate shofar blowing citywide programs. I know that Carly, the long-suffering Carly, is going to be sending out all the details of how you can hear shofar wherever you live in Los Angeles, so that if you're living in the flats of Beverly Hills, there'll be somewhere where you can hear the shofar. If you're living south of Burton Way, between Burton and Wilshire, there'll be somewhere where you can hear the shofar. If you're living on the Sunset, somewhere near the Sunset Strip, you'll be able to hear the shofar. There will be somewhere where you can hear the shofar. If you're living in Fairfax, you can hear the shofar. There will be somewhere where you can walk on Rosh Hashana, which won't be too far from your house, 5-10 minutes from your house, where you will be able to hear the shofar safely, and you'll be able to discharge your duty on Sunday, probably Sunday afternoon. The times will be given, and if you're not sure where that's going to be, do not hesitate to bother Carly. Do not hesitate to email her or give her a call, and her email address is Carly, C-A-R-L-Y, @yinbh.org, and just tell her where you live, and she'll see whether she can find a place where you can hear the shofar on Sunday afternoon, so that you can discharge your duty as far as hearing the shofar is concerned. I see there's some people on here who live quite far north of Sunset. So you probably think to yourself, well, I live in, Truesdale. Where am I going to hear the shofar? Don't worry. Wherever you live, there's going to be someone who's going to blow shofar for you. You may have to walk a bit, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but you'll be able to hear the shofar. Don't worry about it. The main thing is that you'll be able to hear shofar on Rosh Hashana somewhere this year, even if you are davening at home. Now, the actual prayers for shofar begin with the psukim, and that doesn't have to be said by the person who's the Baal Tokea. You don't have to have the person who's blowing the shofar saying that. You can actually say that as part of your davening, even if you're not blowing the shofar. You can say those psukim, they're very important psukim. And we're going to be saying those in shul, and obviously in the minyanim. There's one in the SBE parking lot next to our shul. There's another one at the Nissel tennis court. Hopefully you're already booked in if you are going to shul, so that you can be safely placed there at a social distance and you'll be able to hear the shofar. The shofar blowing will take place on Sunday roughly at 9:30. Roughly. When I say 9:30, it could be 9:25 or 9:36. But roughly at 9:30, that's when we're going to be blowing shofar at either at the Nissel tennis court. In the shul, which starts at 10 o'clock, the SBE parking lot, if that's where you're davening, it'll be roughly at 11 o'clock. Again, it could be 10:54 or it could be 11:03. I'm just saying that roughly an hour after we start, that's when we're going to have the shofar blowing. So I recommend that you get to shul a little bit earlier to make sure that you know that you're going to hear the shofar blowing this year on the Sunday. And now, finally, before I'm going to open myself up for questions, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do for Musaf. Musaf is the most important tefillah of Yomim Noraim, Musaf of Rosh Hashana. Why? Because during Musaf, we declare our feelings of faith towards God. How do we do that? By describing what God means to us, based not just on our own feelings. We don't just unburden ourselves in sort of faith language. What we do is we take scripture and we use that to underpin three aspects of God that we know to be the most important aspects of God as they relate to us. God, of course, is beyond our comprehension. We shouldn't ever imagine that we've worked him all out, because we haven't. But at the very least, we can know with relevance to us what God means. That part we can work out. And God means three things to us, and on Rosh Hashana, uniquely, we declare those things openly, and we use scriptural references to prove it. The first is Malchios, that God is majesty, God is royalty, God is the ultimate leader, God is the ultimate force in our world, in our universe, in every universe, but for us personally and collectively. Malchios, Melech. Then we have Zichronos. What Zichronos? God has the most powerful memory. You know, we don't have such great memories. Some things we remember, some things we don't. Sometimes our memory is mistaken. God is memory. God is the essence of memory, of everything that's ever happened. That's what God is. So that's Zichronos. And Shofros, that means God is, the shofar is the reminder. God is the great reminder of our duties and obligations as human beings towards each other and towards him. And the shofar is something that's always been there. It's been a motif in Jewish life since Mount Sinai, and in fact, even before, because we know that, as I said earlier, at the Akedah, that Abraham Avinu had the shofar, the ram's horn, which he took off the ram that he brought for slaughter in place of his son. The idea is that we need reminding. We need an alarm clock. We need to be told, now is the time, and let's get on with it. And God has always been there as the way to prompt us into being better people and to being the best that we can be. So those three things are crucial and essential in our process for facing the new year. Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. That's why the Musaf on Rosh Hashana is the longest Musaf of the year. And we're going to, this year, whereas in a usual circumstance, the Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros are kind of towards the end of the repetition, this year they're going to be the whole repetition, because most of the other things that we normally say during the repetition, we're not going to be saying this year because we need to keep the service short. And at home, of course, we don't do the repetition. We just say the Shemona Esrei. You'll have all the time in the world at home to focus fully and completely on making sure that you get every word right, every word clear, that you can look at the translation, that you can have it, say it with a full devotion and full concentration. Which leaves me with just one last thing. There is a famous prayer that we say every single year. I've written about it. It dates back probably more than 1,000 years. It's been mistakenly attributed to somebody called Rabbi Amnon of Mainz. If you want to look at my article on that, you're welcome to do so. You can find it on my website, www.rabbidunner.com. Maybe we'll get Carly to post it here on the chat if she can find it. Rabbi Amnon of Mainz. But the prayer is called Untitled Chapter. Why is it such an important prayer? Because it's very stark and very real. And I was called by one of the newspapers before Rosh Hashana, what are you going to speak about this year on Rosh Hashana? At that stage, I still thought I was probably going to shul. I'm not sure I am going to shul this year. But whatever the case may be, I said, last year we stood in shul and we all said together, who's going to live and who is going to die? Mi b'magefa, who's going to die from a pandemic? Did you say that last year? I think you did, right? I mean, there it is. It's in the machzor. When you were saying that word, mi b'magefa, those words, what were you thinking to yourself? Yeah, of course, magefa, that's something that used to happen. The Black Death in the 14th century, that was magefa. In the 21st century, no such thing as a magefa. Yeah, of course, here it is. We have to include it because we can't take words out of davening. After all, we're Orthodox, we're not Reform. Mi b'magefa. Think about that. That's what we said. That was what was in there. And just in this country, 200,000 people have died b'magefa this year, between last Rosh Hashana and this Rosh Hashana. Could you have ever thought that that was possible? Mi yichye mi amos? Unbelievable, right? So, it's not a prayer that I would leave out very easily. Somebody asked a rabbi in New York, I'm not going to say his name. They said to him, do we need to say Untitled Chapter this year on Rosh Hashana if we are abridging the services? He said, no, it's only a minhag, you don't need to say it. I said, somebody told me about this. I said, yeah, that rabbi must be a Litvak. He can't be a Chosid or a Yekka. Because if he was a Chosid or a Yekka, there was no way that he would leave that one out. And I think I'm right. I think that that's one of the most important prayers of the year. Of all the prayers, it may only be a minhag to say it. It may not be part of the davening. And I think that even if you are at home, and there's no repetition of the davening, you have to say Untitled Chapter. I'm going to give you the page number here. I have to find it. Before Kedusha. Page 480 in your art scroll. Hopefully you'll all have art scrolls in front of you by the time it gets to Rosh Hashana. Page 480. A very important prayer this year. Let us pray that we all have health and life, and that all our prayers in these very challenging circumstances are going to come to fruition, and that next year we can, of course, all be back together in shul, in normal conditions, in normal situation, without having to concern ourselves about social distancing and N95 masks and Purell and every other trapping of the year 2020, a year that we will all want to forget. We're all going to wake up on the 1st of January 2021 and think to ourselves, what was 2020 all about? We're just going to want to get it out of the way. So that ends my soliloquy. I now open myself up to questions. We can come off the mute, Carly, and if anybody has any questions, you don't.
Everyone can unmute themselves.
Yeah, okay.
If they wish.
You don't have to have any questions. If you've got nothing to ask, it means obviously I've given an absolutely perfect presentation. But if you've got something to ask, you know that I'm here to answer your questions. If you don't want to do it in a public forum, email me and I'll give you a call. And I'm very happy to do that. Okay? Shawnee, everything was okay?
I want to wish you a refuah shlema and hope that for Kippur, you will be able to be with us.
I certainly hope so. That's my intention. My intention is to be fully recovered and to be back in action to the extent that one can be in these circumstances. Thank you so much, Shawnee.
Take care of yourself.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? No?
Yeah, Rabbi. Oh, no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, Refuah Shlema to you, also Rabbi. I was wondering, so besides, you mentioned leaving out the repetition, but I know that there's also a lot of things that the congregation themselves say during repetition. Is that also something that's left out? That's
Yes.
the first question. And the other one is, if it's, it's a long davening, we're going to have our 1-year-old at home. And so if it's should happen that the mind is wandering or energy is running low, whatever it is, even though we, ironically have all the time in the world, but not necessarily all the energy, where should the kind of primary focus be aside from the Amidah and Musaf? Is there any particular parts that should be given the most focus if we don't have the ability to sit through hundreds of pages
first
of
of all,
reading?
you don't have to do it all in one go. So you've got all day. Musaf can be done in the afternoon. So if you want to do some in the morning and then take a 4-hour break and do a little bit more in the afternoon, that's absolutely fine. You're not in any, you're not tied down by the schedule of a shul. The only thing you need to make sure to do is to say Shema before the Zman of Kriya Shema, which I don't have in front of me. And to the extent that it's possible, of course, to try and do Shemona Esrei the morning, the first Shemona Esrei of Shachris, to do it as early as possible. Again, I don't know the exact time, but to do that at a time when you should be doing Shachris. But Musaf, you can do all day. In fact, you could even do Musaf after Mincha. So, it's not, you're not tied down to a particular time. And I would say something else, but I guess if I'm live, there's no way I can say don't quote me. To the extent that it's possible, you should do the Musaf Shemona Esrei all in one go. But if it's not possible, and you're not able to do the whole Musaf in one go because of prevailing circumstances in your home, then do as much as you can, stop, and then do the rest that you can do later. So, the halacha says, for example, if you are, this has nothing to do with Rosh Hashana, if you're in a situation and you're davening Shemona Esrei and your child dirties their diaper, you don't want your child to walk around a dirty diaper, you can break your Shemona Esrei, change your child's dirty diaper, and then go back to the Shemona Esrei. Why? Because it'll be so distracting for you if your child's diaper is dirty that your Shemona Esrei will be affected. I think the same applies this year, perhaps even more so. You're going to be at home, confined, and I think that if to the extent that you're able to do it all in one shot, you should. And if you can't, you take a break, and after a few minutes, you come back to it. That's absolutely fine. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. I appreciate it, and I hope you feel better.
Thank you very, very much. All right. I wish you all well. Thank you so much for your patience, your forbearance. And I wish you all Kasiva V'Chasima Tova. Should have a wonderful, healthy, beautiful year. And that Rosh Hashana this year should be meaningful. Perhaps it will be the most meaningful Rosh Hashana you have ever had and will ever have. It's possible. I think it's possible. So please enjoy.
Thank you, Rabbi.